Welcome to week 5. You are officially 2/3 through the program. Hope you had a good week learning all things about Web3, NFTs, DAOs, security tokens, and all that jazz. Today we have Dane Lund and Adam Carlton who are going to dive deeper into the subject matter with us. But before that, we just wanted to hop on and do a recap of this week's learnings when it comes to all things trends in Web3. Gabby, do you want to do a little quiz recap?
Sure. So why don't we go ahead and we'll start just with a few quick questions. So I'll kind of kick it off. So how does a DAO manage a protocol? Some of the different ways that we've explored this week, if we were to go through, we can just do a quick vote based on the thumbs up, thumbs down, or hand raise function that you have in your toolbar. So here's your options today. Token holders vote based on their shares. Token holders vote, one holder equals one vote. DAO management team decides. So who thinks it is answer 1, token holders vote based on their shares?
And I'm putting these options into the chat as well just now.
Awesome. How about the second choice? Token holders vote, one holder equals one vote. Okay. And DAO management team decides. How does a DAO manage a protocol? Okay, I'm going to throw it over to Isla. Isla, how does a DAO manage a protocol?
Actually, I might toss it over to our DAO expert of them all. Dane, do you want to answer this one? How does DAO manage a protocol?
Sure. So I think that it's variable insofar as there are many ways to set up your DAO structure. The most common way is token weighted voting. So token holders would vote in proportion to their tokens owned, and that there would be some kind of quorum requirement. And after that, it's often a majority vote. Sometimes it can be a super majority. It can also be one person, one vote, though. So you could have an NFT-based DAO, for instance. A good example is like Nouns is an NFT-based community. They're one NFT, one vote. And then there are combinations like Optimism, which has token weighted voting for certain decisions, and then NFT weighted or one person, one vote for other decisions. So it's a very big creative space. The thing I'd note is that, discussion of shares would be the tell on option A, I wouldn't refer to tokens as shares. So in that instance, I'd say one person, one vote is probably the best answer. Happy to elaborate.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you so much. Yeah. Gabby, do you want to hop on to the next one? I'll plug it into the chat.
Yeah. So this one, we're just going to ask through, what is the difference between Web3 and Web2? There's a lot of different learning and reflection that we did this week on this subject. So we had 3 options. Option 1, Web2 is centralized. Web3 is decentralized. Okay. Is Web2 C++ and Web3 Java? Or Web2 was invested by Bill Gates, Web3 by Satoshi? And I think we'll give you just a minute here to kind of go through. So who thinks it's option 1? Web2 is centralized. Web3 is decentralized. You can raise your hand function. Okay. And Web2 is C++. Web3 is Java. Okay. And Web2 was invested by Bill Gates, Web3 by Satoshi. All right, let's throw it over to Adam. Adam, what do you think about this question? Do you think it's because Web2 was all invented and created by Bill Gates and Web3 by Satoshi? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, I was around, let's say, when Bitcoin started and interested in it and read the papers and was very curious about it. And it wasn't really a discussion of anything about, how players in the marketplace and the capitalist marketplace were controlling information or privacy or thing like that. It was more in a reaction to the 2008 financial crisis, right? And so I think Web3 has kind of come as more of a almost techno-social evolution or revolution in response to overreach by companies like Facebook and Meta and other companies, with privacy. I have a bit of a background in data privacy, and in the US, I mean, we were just absolutely horrid, right, with our lack of controls around, what privacy there is. So I think that, that it kind of morphed out of the capabilities that blockchain brought, and less so from kind of the original founding, just like we just don't trust the Federal Reserve to not inflate away money. So I think that's a kind of a general my perception. And then just, when I talk about the two to people, I say, okay, well, Web 2 is highly centralized, capitalist, shareholder oriented traditional system, and Web 3 is about putting the power of whether it's an economic or privacy or data or what have you, control in the end user's hands, and having control over that. So, you probably heard the phrase, not your keys, not your currency, right? That's really at the end of the day, what Web3 is about, is empowering the individual over that technology.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. I really appreciate it. That's a really unique way of viewing it. And I thank you for kind of deep diving with us today. Okay. So last question, Isla, if you want to throw it in the chat box. If you own an NFT, what do you really own? Do you own a unique unit of data on a blockchain, a digital image or sound file, or option 3, a piece of the OpenSea platform? You can go ahead, you can put your answers in the chat box, or I will go through quickly and you can go ahead and raise your hand. So the first one, if you own an NFT, is it a unique unit of data on a blockchain? How many people think that's true? Okay. Is it number 2, a digital image or a sound file? Is it like a JPEG? Don't laugh at me. I'm having fun with this. Is it a piece of the OpenSea platform? So not. All right, guys. Well, let's go ahead. I'm going to throw this one back to Dane Lund. And actually, we're going to have both of you guys answer on this one, because I think it's kind of fun to, like think about what it is that you're actually owning. And maybe if you could expand even a little bit beyond those 3 options about like your thoughts of what you're owning in terms of future value as well. So let's go to Dane first. Dane?
Yeah, so I'm going to start super technical, I think. Like if you, like an NFT is effectively it's a non-fungible token on a ledger. And if your wallet controls it, then you control this token, which could contain data of any kind inside of it, and it's unique. So the smart contract system will recognize it as different from other types of tokens. It can't just be exchanged like any other, and it can have unique value. So that's really how I'd look at it. What's inside the NFT could be many different things. I mean, you could set it up to signify like some proportionate owning of something. And so that's why you'll see like NFTs that represent IP rights. You'll see NFTs that represent real estate rights. Something really important, though, is a lot of the NFTs out there don't really give you IP rights. Like that's a separate system. So just by owning the NFT doesn't necessarily mean you own the IP rights. Like you got to do some diligence there to see whether or not the people who have created the content in the NFT have assigned the rights to NFT holders.
Perfect. Excellent. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Adam. Adam, what are your thoughts? What are you thinking? We had like a very kind of a technical, perhaps, reflection on that. What do you think you actually own?
So kind of as Dane alluded to, it does depend very much on, the underlying code and IP rights assignments and things like that. But when I talk to people about NFTs, there's a few different categories, right? One, it's a digital collectible, and then you're seeing that phrase used more often. NFT kind of is becoming a little bit of a, I don't want to call it a bad word, but people are just like, very divisive, right? And so I think, when you look at the most common use case is digital collectibles, and oftentimes it creates access into certain communities, right? So this is what you see in, the more popular Bored Ape Yacht Clubs and things like that, is you get access via the NFT to their community. You might get access to merchandise, you might get real world access into events and things like that. For example, I went to an NFT conference and I held a World of Women NFT, and I got to go to a party through that access, right? So, so that digital collectible then can oftentimes be tied into real world access, or it also can be tied into real world attributes. It can be financial or otherwise. And so I think some of the more interesting use cases we'll see in the near term, especially as we start to see a little bit more regulatory clarity, is fractionalized assets in NFTs, or managing royalties or payments via an NFT is a really revolutionary way to handle transfer of funds, right? You don't have to have accountants associated with it. You don't have to have, all the normal intermediaries that would be involved with that. It's simply you get X% of this transaction, and it's hard coded into it, and it functions the same way every time. So I think we've just barely scratched the surface, to be honest with you, on NFTs. That's why it's such an exciting way to see things. I mean, there's, if you've ever looked at a list of possible use cases, for example, you look at a typical real estate transaction, right? Well, a title search, if we were to, wave a magic wand and make it happen, title searches would be completely unnecessary when it could be absolutely and utterly verified on an immutable blockchain. So there's all kinds of interesting use cases, I think, that we're going to start to realize in the near future.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get into it? This is kind of like my, favorite part, is just to give you guys a chance to introduce yourselves. Everyone's heard that you're amazing and smart from the comments that you've given back, but if you can, just give us a bit of an overview. I'm going to start with Dane. If you can just introduce yourself briefly, your background, your organization, and what you're passionate about.
Sure. So I'm Dane Lund. I'm with the Alliance ecosystem. So I am the architect of the DAO within that ecosystem, and I will be the executive director of the foundation that kind of represents it. Prior to that, so starting at the beginning, I began my career as an attorney. I was at Wilkie Farr. I was a corporate governance litigator, so everything shareholders' rights I was involved with. I pivoted to investment banking, did large leverage buyout lending, and then I invested in a couple of capacities, including litigation finance, private equity, and merger arbitrage. So always looking at the integration of law and finance, really. And that's what drew me to DAOs. I started kind of as an advocate, working with a firm here in Chicago on a DAO statute, ultimately testified in Wyoming on their own statute. And I tend to be pretty active on the policy side, which is how I ended up with DCA as well.
And I'll go ahead too and pass it over to Adam. Adam, if you can give a bit of an introduction to yourself, your organization, and what you're passionate about.
Sure, thank you. So just quick high-level background on myself. I spent about half my career in industry in a number of different roles, from operations and budget management to project management, IT management. And then I went into management consulting about 10 years ago, mostly focused on data security, data governance. That was my day job. What I'm passionate about and what I've been more deeply involved with the last couple of years are just digital assets in general. Although I've just always been, terribly curious about technology in general. Like I was building PCs, the day I was able to, and went to computer camp. I was a total nerd as a kid. Still am, I guess. And so I've always just had a real interest in these types of technologies and how they can kind of just change the way we interact financially, socially, all the different mechanisms around it. And so about a year ago, I started a company called Pink Panda Holdings. We actually rebranded into Bamboo Asset Management. We're a startup firm, and two kind of the big use case we're doing is trying to build a, a mobile application that just really simplifies access to digital assets. So we've built, a wallet and a swap, which to me is table stakes, and now we want to start expanding into like very unique use cases around NFTs as well as metaverse too. And I'm involved in a couple of metaverses out there as well. And then just because I have a consulting background, and I think people, want to learn about these kinds of things, and it's not a bad way also to earn a little side income, is that we work with organizations to kind of help them jumpstart, right? Whether it's an NFT project or understanding how they can get involved with the metaverse, or, what the compliance issues may be around some of these digital assets. That's also a key attribute of ours. So.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you guys. We're really excited to have you here.
That's it. Thank you.
I wanted to just kind of start things off. Dean, I'm going to throw it to you first. If you can tell us a little bit about what you think some of the most challenging aspects are about launching an emerging Web3 tech, like an NFT or a DAO or a security token product to the public. You work with a lot of different firms. You see a lot of different people trying to move through this ecosystem. What do you think are some of those like key pain points in their ability to kind of access, build, and grow?
So I think by far the first obstacle is access to legal advice and regulatory knowledge. So there's number one, a dearth of attorneys in the space. We're starting to see some more come in, but it's very expensive to get good legal services. But then there's also a mismatch between like attorneys in the space and just knowledge of the regulatory codes. So what's interesting about Web3 is it brings a bunch of regulatory codes together that maybe weren't as obvious for practitioners prior to the development of Web3. So one is obvious, that's securities, but then there's also payment processing. The world in which those two came together was probably more limited in the past. Now it's very broad. Commodities also a very important aspect, exchange laws. All of these things coming together mean that there weren't a lot of people who were equipped to provide good advice here in the beginning. We're seeing some people do it, but I really think that self-education is important. I would never recommend anyone represent themselves and make the legal decisions, but finding good legal minds and finding ways to make it cost effective, very hard. But if you can learn a lot of what the attorneys are going to guide you on, at least you can cut down the education part of the bill. So I think that's the first place to start. Always have a good attorney, but always be kind of informed yourself. I think that some of the other, common maybe hurdles that founders face is kind of the ethos of Web 2, which was, build fast, fail fast, is not as applicable here. Yes, building code and iterating quickly is important for design, but when you have an official launch, the stakes are much higher here. So if we think of like Web 2, maybe the pitfall if you launch early is that your competitor is better positioned relative to you on a one-day basis, but you're very quick and you can move with your centralized platform. And that's a virtue. So you can kind of push quickly. When you're go to market in Web3, I think that it has to be a more thoughtful process. Building parts of it to see how they work may be better than building the whole in the beginning. A lot of times with DAOs, that's how I think it's best to move, like building parts and also being comfortable moving slowly, not launching a token without having all the factors in place. Understanding what it means to have a tokenized community that could be private and the virtues of that. These are all things that I think are important. And then I think that understanding the fundraising environment, a lot of founders come in and think that they're going to get nosebleed valuations. That's not going to be the case for the next, I think, couple of years after, a lot of the fallout we've seen. So understanding what your value prop is, we've seen a lot of founders who, didn't really understand what the economic thesis, why is what you're building a good for the participants in a protocol. And I think that it's hard to know. Sometimes you may have a valuable thesis, you may see the direction of value, but really refining it and saying, this is why what I'm going to do is valuable broadly. And here is one reason, like that people who participate with us can kind of actually participate in economic value. I think that's important. Putting aside that you have to be really careful about the securities implications of that. So it's a tight line to walk.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to throw it over to Adam just to kind of chat about this and give like just a quick kind of his 2 cents on the same question, like what is challenging about launching emerging Web3 tech, if that's okay.
Yeah, I in my mind, when I hear that question, I put it into 2 categories. One is the capabilities of the technology today, and 2 is the expectations, right, of the end users and consumers. So I'll start with the latter, and I think we're ideally getting a bit away from that. I was talking to this last night about someone that said the good thing from the quote crash is that a lot of the speculation has been drawn out, but it's still there. But it's such a highly speculative market, especially people trying to get double their money in hours or even minutes sometimes, right? That exists, and it really exists out there, and then creates kind of this frenzy. So dealing with that speculative side of the end user side, a typical startup company to full maturity is somewhere around anywhere 6 to 10 years, right? And they're looking for 6 to 10 months or something like that for maturity sometimes. And then on the other side of the coin is the technology still is so very young and so very still in its infancy, right? And being in technology for over 20 years, I kind of compare it to so many enterprise class software and cloud solutions and things out there, and then it can be extremely fragile, right? The programming languages for the various blockchains change rapidly. There's a tendency to push code out into production that maybe is not, when I say production, the world out there, that may not be fully vetted or tested or audited. So we see hacks. Interoperability is a huge challenge, right? So there's a lot of challenges on the technology side that I think over time, are going to, as we see the space mature, it's going to be more low code and no code solutions and much more automated testing and things like that, which you see kind of more at an enterprise scale, but you don't see in this space because, again, everything's so fresh and new.
Okay, very good. So if I'm going to go to kind of our next question, I'm going to start with you again, Adam, since we're kind of ping-ponging, I'll say. How are you looking at this space, and how are you seeing like a winner or a loser? Like, what are these emerging tech projects really competing on? And, what do you think maybe, and we don't have to say, how do you spot a winner or loser, but maybe like, what are the characteristics of a project that you think have a high degree potentially of success, if we say it that way?
I tend to look for understatement generally, because I think, kind of to my previous point, there is a lot of speculation, a lot of hype out there. And so I look for something that, is understated, that has a clear goal or utility or use case that you can understand, right? And that's kind of the way I approach my clients, is that, you want to underpromise, overdeliver, and you also want to have a long-term view on this. And so projects and companies that do have a very long-term perspective, and they do have a more measurable utility and a direct use case, I think are the ones that are going to be long-term successful. You see a lot kind of this competition of the blockchains. I have a very different perspective, is that I see blockchains as just different types of databases. And as we know in the enterprise world, there are numerous databases out there that handle a whole lot of different use cases. So I think long-term, right, companies and projects that are more focused on interoperability, on easing, the user experience, right, on creating safety, on creating education, on creating, a more seamless experience, I think those are going to be the winners. I feel like this industry is a bit dominated by the engineers, and while they're incredibly important and they make the world go round, there are times where, I say that's great, but what does this do for the end user? So I think we're going to see that focus shifting, in time to come. I think that, Steve Jobs had a saying, he's like, don't start with the technology, start with the user experience, right? And I think that's where I'd lean towards.
Excellent. So don't start with the technology, start with the user experience. And I think I'm going to just carry that over because I think Dane was saying something very similarly in maybe different wording, but same concept about, coming to the forefront with something that, how is it solving a problem or providing utility? Dane, do you want to kind of, think about or answer that back? What are you looking at when, again, it doesn't have to be how do you know a project is a winner or a loser? Maybe let's soften it and just say, what are some key characteristics that you think offer a path to success, or key success factors, if you will?
Sure. So I think that whenever you're going to engage in Web 2 building, you have to think of how Web 3, how Web 3 is actually going to make something better. So problem has to be well defined, and integration of problem and the technology being used has to work. So there are a lot of very lofty goals of what Web 3 can do. They're so far in the future that it's hard to know. For instance, cars negotiating with each other to pass each other in traffic. Very cool. I don't see that happening in the near future. So bringing it back to earth, thinking of a tangible thing that could be made better using blockchain technology. Well, I think there are a lot of ways to look into metaverse applications, for instance, where you can think of, ability to have a decentralized reality. Very important. So we're seeing a battle between centralized metaverses and decentralized metaverses play out. Centralized metaverses are government sponsored. This is no knock on the governments that are doing it, but South Korea, Dubai, Saudi Arabia are all creating metaverses, investing tons of money in them. They will have some control over reality. And that could be a bad thing. It could be fine. Decentralization could actually help enforce, more realism in the metaverse. And so there I can see problem, which is whatever the metaverse solves. It could be instant access to the shops that you like. I think that's a really cool idea. Reason it's better in Web 3, well, we have community regulated standards that apply to how things can act in this metaverse versus unilaterally driven and potentially skewed views of how things can work. So I always think it's more than just identifying a problem. It's got to be problem plus integration of the ledger and a very heavy scrutiny on why Web 3. A lot of founders build things that are adjacent to Web 3, and I think they're excellent traditional companies. You can do a lot of things with data analysis on the blockchain. You don't need a token to do that. You need somebody else's token to review to do that. And so I think you can build things adjacent to Web3 technology also that are excellent, that are still within the space. But thinking of, do I really need to have a token myself? If what you're trying to do is capture the energy of the speculation that was already mentioned, that's not the purpose of the technology. That is just a kind of wild and risky way of fundraising. So I would really push, should I go the traditional route, run a regular business? That is a legitimate answer, and you can still have functionality in blockchain. That's my rubric for thinking about things.
Excellent. And I wanted to talk a little bit, we've kind of dabbled in some of the metaverse. I wanted to, kind of give it over to Adam for a second, because again, one, Global DCA, we're working very heavily on a MetaCon conference, lots of excitement and interest around this. I wanted to kind of push it over to you, Adam, to see, from your side, bullish or bearish on metaverse, and then, what is it that you see as some of the, not solely entertainment or branding, but what are some of the practical applications that you see or you believe are going to come to us in terms of benefits from the metaverse?
Yeah, so long-term bullish for sure. But when I say long-term, I mean, I think like the rest of my life long term, the rest of our lives long term, right? Not like 3 to 5 years, because it's really, I see it as a convergence of technologies, right? And so we've been inventing all these technologies over the years around AR and VR and gaming and blockchain and all these things that are kind of coming together that are creating this interesting intersection of a much more enhanced experience, right? And another conversation I had yesterday, like you think of these transitions we had from like radio to black and white television, or movies didn't used to have audio in them. They had subtitles, right? And then we went from color. And I'm sure each time there was all kinds of controversy about each of those advances, right? So some people are gonna love the idea of putting on ideally lightweight goggles and being immersed, and other people are like, that's not for me. I think it's going to be a controversial topic because it's going to be a generational thing, right? I think that younger generations and maybe people who want to experience a little more flexible, are going to experience these kinds of things. I was thinking about use cases the other day, and like, what are some good examples of things that we don't like to leave our house for, or would prefer not to leave our house for, maybe. And so we've seen, typical things, streaming and shopping and, maybe music and those kinds of things. But I was thinking, what about like people that are stuck, like people in retirement homes, right? What if we could have a very lightweight, easy, inexpensive way for them to experience maybe pictures and history from their past or their favorite musicians or whatever? What if you were able to have therapy sessions, right? And not have to go into an office and be anonymous in a therapy session and be able to feel much more comfortable, dealing with that. I think that it's really the limiting factors on it are going to still be technology, right? And, I'm counting on Apple and some of these other big players to create very lightweight headwear rather than these giant bulky things that we have right now. But that's how technology works, where we took a phone that was this big 30 years ago, and now it's a tiny little device. So I'm super bullish on metaverse long term, and I think really we're only limited by our imagination and limited by adoption around it.
Excellent. And with that, I'm going to throw it over to Isla. We're going to, I think, begin sort of our prep for the breakout rooms. I think the question that we'll kind of lead in with is, what are you most excited about in terms of, this next wave of NFTs, DAOs, metaverse, and what are you most apprehensive about? So what is it that you're looking at and you're saying, okay, this is a challenge today. How much more of a challenge will it be going forward? So what are you excited about? What are you apprehensive about? Isla, I'll throw it over to you and we can go ahead and do our breakouts. I hope all of your individual breakout session discussions were as interesting and engaging as ours were. It was really a pleasure. We had a great kind of mixed cross-functional team, some people very deep in crypto, Web3, and others kind of just getting involved, coming from traditional finance. We had law enforcement perspectives. So I kind of just wanted to open it up a little bit. And I think, Dane and Adam had a chance to observe and listen. So I'll kind of pass it over to them, and then we can kind of open it up more broadly to a group conversation. So I'll start with Dane. Dane, what were some of the takeaways or comments that you heard in your group?
Sure. So I think two things that everyone's excited about. One is scientific applications of decentralized technologies. So things like medical files and the access to them, or just broader like medical studies. Right now, basically, you give that information away out of the goodness of your heart if you participate, or for a very small amount of money, but you never participate in the royalties. I definitely think, and I think we mutually thought that there is an application. And one of the things that needs to be solved is the tension between the transparency of the blockchain and the privacy of that information. So how can you put it on chain, but keep it private other than in situations where you want it shared? And I think that one of the keys there that we're seeing built now is zero knowledge proofs. So I think zero knowledge proofs are a big component of what's to come next. We're seeing a lot of study there. And then the other is, we talked about identity and the use of NFTs and the likes to show credentialing or international documentation. And I think we're very much in the early stages of creating that architecture. Part of it's a layer of trust that needs to be instilled in the broader world community. People need to be able to understand what this technology does and trust it in order for it to be useful. But I think that's just a matter of time and continued advocacy. So those are the two big topics we covered.
And I'll pass it over to Adam. Adam, what were your takeaways? Similar, different? How did they jive?
So yeah, we talked a fair amount about decentralized identity as well, and how that really shows a lot of promise, I think, for solving potentially not only like regulatory issues, right? So being able to solve a lot of the problems around being able to identify fund issues, but also like from a metaverse perspective or other Web3 is being able to like truly identify someone as a real human being, not a bot, not a script, or being able to potentially filter out those types of people, right? If they're not a quote identified human, being able to have potentially a way to deal with legal issues that come up if they're threatening or harassing or doing things in the metaverse that are unethical or illegal, right? So having a mechanism to kind of control or filter whatever people by a way that also still protects who they are and their anonymity. And my guess is that there'll probably be like tiers of decentralized identity, from like, hey, I'm fully anonymous to I'm fully not anonymous, but I'm a number or a code or what have you, and you can't tell who I am. But you could, if I stole from you or harassed you, I could be revealed and prosecuted or banned or whatever, right? And then we talked a fair about upcoming regulatory challenges, right, and how that can be just off-putting, I think, for a lot of especially financial institutions, but other organizations. There's a lot of froth around what's going to happen in the regulatory environment, and just a lot of cynicism and things like that. And obviously, being part of the GDCA, we know that we're trying to direct that and the best outcome we can too. So I think that's going to tend, ideally that's going to be some best case scenario or middle ground, right, where we feel like we can still have solid innovation while kind of protecting people where we need to.
And I'm actually going to ask, I talk all the time, so I'm going to pass it over, if it's okay, Kevin, to talk a little bit about, what some of our takeaways were, because I think you had a really unique perspective in terms of how we could maybe mitigate some of the challenges that we saw in this new kind of emerging space. Kevin?
Yeah, thank you. So right now, you can register for domains now on the blockchain. There are certain, I feel like, Web3 precursor networks out there that exist. The darknet, LokiNet, which is built on the Oxen blockchain, ZeroNet, which is built on the Bitcoin blockchain, and then you have these services like NameSilo, Unstoppable Domains. And this is where you can buy and park your sites on these blockchains as they are now. But a question that got asked to me last night at the DCA and Unbid event by somebody was like, well, what do you feel that they're not doing enough of from a law enforcement perspective? And I feel that they could be doing better with authenticating who's actually parking these domains. A lot of these fake exchanges that are out there right now that are duping people out of like hundreds of thousands of dollars with Tether and things of that nature are parked on these domains through Unstoppable and NameSilo. And when you get the registration information from them, it's like right off the bat, they registered the domain with a Tor proxy or a VPN. And they have the capability to do a little bit further where, oh, why is this person registering this domain with a Tor proxy or a VPN? 100%. There's reasons people could be doing that if they're in a country that outlaws this type of activity on the internet. 100%. But what payment instrument are they paying with? They're paying with a Amex or Visa gift card, and they're using an email address that if you try to email it, it bounces back. It's just something where they could be doing a little bit more for people to have more of a
What or not?
I guess I feel they would have more confidence in these sites, and they wouldn't view them as kind of these conduits for fraud as they exist right now.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Any other group thoughts? There were a lot of different, concepts and perspectives that were shared. Happy to kind of have anyone else from the different groups kind of pitch up and give their 2 cents or thoughts on, the conversation that they had together. Okay, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Isla to kind of give a few perspectives, wrap up thoughts, and then we can kind of take it to the next step.
Yeah, one thing to think about maybe in preparation for next week, because next week is everything regulatory and kind of crypto in your world. So what are the opportunities that you're kind of faced with for the rest of 2022 and 2023, and then the challenges that come with it from a regulatory perspective. And I wanted to hear maybe from both of the speakers a little bit around how they're seeing regulations when it comes to NFTs specifically. Just because we have spent so much time trying to regulate DeFi this year, we saw that kind of come crashing down in one way, shape, or form. But I feel like NFTs is a whole different ballgame that the regulator hasn't really been able to wrap their head around. What are your views and thoughts on what the future regulation of NFTs might look like? Maybe I'll call on Adam first.
Sure. So I don't have anything other than gut to speak for this, and talking to a lot of people like that. But I think that that we'll see regulation around like collectibles type NFTs will be relatively limited. I think where regulation where it's going to come in is under fractionalization of an asset, right? Which clearly now you're pretty well into the realm of some type of security. And then I think there'll probably be some regulation potentially around royalties again. And I think that's so anytime there's like, this ongoing stream of money, or you're owning something that is part of, potentially a larger security, that's where regulatory side comes in. But I think in general, the collectible side, right? The kind of utility-based NFTs, we see the access-based NFTs. I think those will be less regulated than ones that seem to clearly fall into the realm of security side.
Anything from your side as well? I'd love to hear from you, Dane, if there's any bits and pieces that you might have insights on.
So I definitely think fractionalization is on the agenda, distinguishing between like NFTs that are of a collectible nature versus NFTs that are proxies for, stock shares, I think is going to be a near-term consideration. I think that there is a real desire on behalf of a lot of policymakers to insulate NFTs broadly from more restrictive regulation. So I don't know which way it's going to break. However, I think that we're not going to get clarity in the near term because we have a midterm coming up in the US. The results of that will, probably guide whether or not, if there's a divided Congress, I think, again, there's probably going to be nothing. I don't think this is a frontier that the SEC wants to fight on in the first instance. I think they're far more comfortable fighting on ERC-20s like fungible tokens. So that leaves it as a null space probably for the next 3 years. Doesn't mean that nothing will happen, but I think that less will happen than we might think.
Any other thoughts from the rest of the attendees and students today on that topic of NFTs and regulation? Well, in that case, I feel like we have to wait until next week when that's the only thing we're going to be talking about is regulatory everything. What will happen next week is we'll complete the course as usual. Then on Saturday morning or Friday afternoon, you will receive your certificate of completion, provided that you have gone through all of the video content that was provided via the website. And then we have a couple of other goodies that will be given to you as part of completing the course. And of course, after everything is over, you'll always have access to kind of the alumni network in our Telegram group and all future content that's being developed. And as we're currently updating the content for batch 2 of this course as well, you'll have access to the new content there. So that's it for today. Any closing thoughts, Gabby, except for thank you so much to Adam and to Dane for sharing your wisdom today. It was really insightful.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to have you both. Thank you, Dane. Thank you, Adam. Great conversation. Really fun to pick your brains. I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
Yep.
Have a good one. Thanks so much,
Thank
everyone.
you.